Hello, everybody. Shavua Tov. We are going to jump into it. Tonight's topic, tonight's class is titled Someone to Break Us, and we'll see why. We're going to read a short comment from the Kedushat Levi. This guy, 18th century Hasidic rabbi. And then we're going to jump around a little bit. Touched off by his comment, we're going to read another idea in the same vein from the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, and then the Baal Shem Tov's main disciple, Rabbi Dov Ber. So, also known as the Magid of Mezrich. That's what I was looking for. Okay, so our comment, of course, we are looking at the Torah portion that we just read this Shabbat. And if you remember, in the Torah portion, Joseph becomes the second in command to Pharaoh, and he's in charge of all of these, the whole plan to store food and dispense it during the years of famine. So this is the verse that we're going to look at. It's chapter 42, verse 6 in Genesis. And in English, it's, now Joseph was the vizier of the land. It was he who dispensed rations to all of the people of the land. Now we're going to read it in the Hebrew, and you'll see why the Hebrew is going to make a difference here. It says, Vayosef hu hashalit al haaretz, hu hamashbir lechol am haaretz. Hello, Nathan. Hello, Elaine and Steve, joining us in Florida. Hello. Okay, so that's the line we're going to jump off at. Hu hamashbir. So this is from the Kedushat Levi. He says, Ki yesh am Hashem ve'am haaretz. He says, there are people of God, and there are the am haaretz, the people of the earth. In rabbinic literature, am haaretz typically means people who aren't very learned. You know, they're just, you're kind of, your average Joe, so to speak. And he says, so there's God's people, and then there's the am haaretz. There's normal people. But listen to what he does here. He goes on. He says, am haaretz, no, am Hashem. He says, the people of God, elu hatzadikim. These are the righteous ones, the Tzadik. Tonight we're going to talk a lot about the Tzadik and the role of the Tzadik in Hasidic Judaism. He says, the people of God, these are the Tzadikim. Ve'am haaretz, and the people of the land, elu hamedubakim la'aretz. These are the ones who are attached to the land, who are stuck to the land. He completely redefines the idea of am haaretz. It's not somebody who's unlearned. It's not somebody who's just a normal person. These are people, he says, who are attached to the land, who can't let go of the land, whose entire being is so attached to the physical things around them. Physical things like money, physical things like achievements. These are all, of course, important things. But the am haaretz, he says, are the ones who are ha-medubakim la'aretz, who can't let go. They're the ones who are attached to the land in an unhealthy way. V'tzarich lishbor otam. And he says, and one needs to break them. One needs to break that habit. V'zehu haremez. This is the hint in the verse. V'yosef hu hashalit hamashbir. Shemishaber elu ha'anashim. So in the Hebrew, hamashbir, in our Torah portion in context, meant to divide food. But that same root means to break. And so he's rereading the verse, saying Yosef, he was the vizier of Egypt, the one who broke these people. Asher hem tzrichim aliyot. They're the ones who need some kind of raising up. Laha'alot otam likrot am Hashem, to raise them up to be people of God. V'zehu hamashbir. And this is this word in Hebrew, hamashbir, Lashon shever la'am ha'aretz likro am Hashem, in order to break these am ha'aretz, these people who are attached to the land, attached to physical things, so that they can be called people of God. Okay, before we go on, there's a few things I want to talk about this little comment. I love the idea of, we're going to talk tonight about the role of the Tzadik, and we're going to look at, this is the Kedushat Levi's one idea of the Tzadik, and we're going to look at two more tonight from the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mezrich. Kedushat Levi says one responsibility of the Tzadik is to break the habit of people being attached to physical things, to help raise them up, to show them there's things that are more important in this world than the physical things around them. Again, we need, physical things. We need homes, we need cars, we need money to buy food. We need physical things. But to be attached to them means, in an unhealthy way, is what he's against. We can all imagine what it means to be attached to physical things in an unhealthy way, to have your whole being and your whole purpose in this world defined by trying to accumulate physical goods. Your whole personality and your worth defined by things. And he says one responsibility of the tzaddik, like Joseph, is to break people of that habit, lishbor otam, not to divvy up food amongst them, but actually to break them, to break that habit. And I do believe he sees himself in that vein. Remember, in Hasidic Judaism, the tzaddik is really the center of one's spiritual experience, the center of the community. It is a defining feature of Hasidic Judaism is the tzaddik at the center of the community. It is exactly, by the way, that motto that the Mitnagdim, the opponents of Hasidic Judaism in the 18th and 19th century, were so vehemently against. How could you have a Judaism where there's like a one central person, who's responsible for your connection to God? Each and every individual person is responsible. So that would be the argument of the Mitnagdim. In Hasidic Judaism, the tzaddik plays a key role. And according to the Kedushat Levi, one responsibility is this is the person who's responsible for the spiritual state of the community. If they see somebody who's medubakim la'aretz, who's attached in an unhealthy way to physical things, their job is to break them out of that habit. I also want to expand it and say, I think all of us can have, characteristics of tzaddikim and tzaddikot like within us, and we can take these as advice not only for ourselves, but also when we want to act righteous in the world. If we see somebody who's acting in an unhealthy way, so attached to physical things, this is permission, and maybe even imperative on us to break them, that is to say, to break that habit. Okay, so touched off by that, we're going to look at two other sources for the tzaddik. What is a tzaddik? What's the role of the tzaddik? So the first is from the Baal Shem Tov. Now I want to remind you, the Baal Shem Tov never had any books. He didn't know that he was starting a movement. He just taught disciples who then went out and spread his message of his unique style of Judaism to the world. So this is from the Baal Shem Tov. Not that he wrote it, but it was said in his name. So I heard from my teacher, the Baal Shem Tov, an interpretation of the Talmudic saying, in connection with Moses, the fear of heaven was a small thing. The difficulty here is obvious. Moses was not speaking to himself, but addressing the people of Israel. He explained it as follows. The Talmud states that the verse, "You shall fear the Lord your God," includes scholars. The Maharsha explains this on the basis of saying that a bore cannot be sin-fearing. Consequently, when a man is a scholar, he attains the fear of God. This is why the verse includes scholars. Now of Moses we find it written, and they were afraid to come near him. That's Exodus 34, verse 30. Since this was so, the people had had some experience of the fear of scholars, and hence could easily progress to the fear of God. This is the meaning of, in connection with Moses, the fear of heaven was a small thing. That is to say, since they had already attained to the fear of scholars in connection with Moses, of whom it is said they were afraid to come near him, it was a small thing for them to progress to the fear of God, since one follows from the other. This is another idea of the role of the Tzadik in the community. The Tzadik holds herself to a level of holiness, a level of kedusha, a level of observance that is awe-worthy. So the point where in connecting with the Tzadik and talking with the Tzadik and even being in the presence of that Tzadik, you feel a little bit of, here it says fear, but I think the word is really reverence. Now, I'm not saying this is, the best way, but I'm saying in Hasidic tradition, this is another role of the Tzadik. This is why there are Rebbes. This is why, one goes to the Rebbe for questions, for anything. This is why one wants to be close to the Rebbe, because the idea is when you're by a Tzadik, you can progress from reverence toward that person, that is to say, toward what that person represents, to God. Now, maybe you could feel here kind of the tension, why this would be such a problem, for the message of Hasidic Judaism, why people might be against it. Because it's exactly saying that the only way, to really reach that fear of heaven, or at least, the most effective route, is first to have reverence toward a person, and then you have reverence toward God. Now, I think there are, truths in that. We all maybe can imagine somebody, who we admire, somebody who, I know I have my rabbis who I deeply admire. When I'm around them, I feel permission to be elevated a little bit more. I feel myself, growing closer to God just being around them, hearing them teach, seeing them daven. It makes a big difference. This is one of the beautiful things about praying in a minyan in general, is that you can, when you're close to other people who are connecting to God, it empowers you to do so too. It propels you to do so too. When this is kind of the extreme version of that. You have somebody in the community who you designate as being the closest to God, and then through reverence of that person, you then attain a level of fear and awe and joy and love toward God in a more effective way. Okay, that's second role of a tzaddik. The first was to break you of your habit about being connected to the land, and the second is having reverence toward a person in order to have reverence toward God. Take it or leave it. I'm just reporting the facts here about the role of a tzaddik, and these are the earliest sources. You can't get earlier in Hasidic Judaism than the Baal Shem Tov, born in the year 1700, by the way, just to get a timestamp on this. This is at the root of Hasidic Judaism, these ideas. Okay, now we're going to go to the Baal Shem Tov's student, the Maggid of Mezrich. One more teaching about the role of a tzaddik. And then after this, I want to share one story. I've shared it a number of times about the idea of breaking one's connection to physical things in order to attain a more spiritual experience. We're going to go back to that idea at the end after this teaching. This is the third idea we're offering tonight about the role of the Tzadik from the Maggid of Mizrach. Oh, and I'll also tell you his birth and death date. So now we're talking, he's born in 1710, died in 1772. He says, the Talmud says that the acts of tzaddikim are greater than the acts of creation of heaven and earth. Just hold that for a second. That's from the Talmud. That's not even Hasidic Judaism yet. And the Talmud probably doesn't mean tzaddik in the same way Hasidic Judaism does. But this is what the Talmud says. The acts of tzaddikim are greater than the acts of creation of heaven and earth. The meaning, says the Maggid of Mizrach, is that the act of creation involved the emergence of something out of nothing, whereas the acts of tzaddikim involve the turning of something into nothing. For in whatever they do, even if it be a physical thing like eating or drinking, they raise on high the holy sparks in that food. And so in all that they do, they convert something into nothing. The role of the tzaddik to the Maggid of Mizrach is rooted in a deep spiritual connection with the world around him. That is to say, the idea of turning something into nothing. God in Kabbalah is called ayin, nothingness. From this nothingness, creation emerges. And our role as Jews, if we're talking the Kabbalistic responsibility of Jews, it's to take all the something around us and connect it back to that deeper source rooted in ayin, rooted in nothingness. That is what it means to take something and make it nothing, to take it and raise it up and connect it back to God, who is called ayin, who is called nothingness. When you eat something, when you say a blessing, you're taking this something and you're connecting it to something eternal, something that used to be nothing and emanated downwards in a particular way to create everything around us. And the tzaddik, he says, every act of the tzaddik is to connect the somethingness of this world back to the nothingness of God. Every single act, every step, every word, every piece of advice, every physical thing that this person does is done with the intention of connecting it back to nothingness. And in this way, the tzaddik is doing the work of our tradition. He's doing the work of Judaism, of raising up these holy sparks, connecting the somethingness of this world back to nothing. It's less practical than the Baal Shem Tov's idea. The role of the tzaddik that we saw in that Baal Shem Tov's teaching is, to be that conduit so you can learn how to love and fear, so that way you can transmit that feeling to God. To the Kedushat Levi, it was also kind of practical. It was about breaking somebody's connection with physical things, so that way they can attain that relationship to God, which is not a physical thing. And then perhaps it's all tied together in this teaching, which is to say the role of the tzaddik is to show how the somethingness of the world around us is just the starting point. And from there, we connect using the creation around us, using the somethingness of the world around us, back to ayin, back to the nothingness of God, that great, eternal, infinite mystery of which no words can be used to describe it. We connect that he says the tzaddik takes the somethingness, connects it back to nothingness. So these are three roles of tzaddikim that I wanted to talk about tonight. By the way, I'll invite any of you to write in the chat if you have thoughts, questions, concerns. You're welcome to put it in at any time. I want to share one more teaching that... hi, Chris. Hi. Shavua Tov. one more teaching tonight connected to the Kedushat Levi's idea about the responsibility of a Tzadik lishbor l'kol am haaretz, not to divvy up food amongst the am haaretz like we saw translated that way in Genesis, but to break one's attachment to physical things. And I've shared this story before, but it's so good and so personally meaningful. And if this is the only story you remember from the months of teaching we've been doing, then I feel like you've done something good as far as learning Hasidut. I'm going to read it verbatim here. This is a story transmitted and attributed to the Baal Shem Tov. A certain wise king had once succeeded by means of magic to erect ramparts and towers, with an entrance gate at each rampart. By the way, the king here is going to be God, and the magic castle, the castle created through magic, perhaps is emanation from nothingness to somethingness. So we have here the beginning, God creating heaven and earth. It said a certain wise king had once succeeded by means of magic to erect ramparts and towers with an entrance gate at each rampart. He ordered gold and silver coins to be scattered near each gate. And it was the king's command that whoever desired to appear in the king's presence should make his or her way through all the gates and ramparts and towers. There were people who, arriving at the first gate and on seeing several handfuls of the coins, were content to return home without desiring to be in the king's presence at all. Others came as far as the second or third gate, and having gathered up handfuls of the precious coins at each gate, hurriedly returned to their homes in order to put their riches away. There was only one lover of the king who disdained to touch the gold and silver lying in their path, because all of their yearning and desire was to see the king. When at last he came into the king's presence and glanced behind him, he saw that all the ramparts and towers and gates had gone, and that there was nothing separating him from the king, and that all the dividing walls had been things of the imagination. This story has so much meaning in it. The idea of, first of all, the topic tonight is role of the Tzadik. And you can see the Baal Shem Tov also believes that part of the role of the Tzadik is to be that person who's able to walk through these gates, who's able to come close to God, because not everybody can do this. It's very hard. When we get closer to God, we find that we have more and more of these, coins, so to speak, and we find riches and we find all kinds of things that distract us. But it takes a special person to be able to disdain those things and to keep one's eye on that goal of getting close to the king. That is to say, getting close to God. So as far as role of the Tzadik, it's a unique thing that the Tzadik can do, is get that close and see reality for what it is, all connected to God and all part of a great big whole that's illusory. I also love it as far as the idea of what it takes, the reason that the Tzadik, according to the Kedushat Levi, has to break lechol hama'aretz, to break people's connection to physical things, because that is what distracts us from connecting to God. I'm blessed to have this book. This is, by the way, the sources for a class that was taught at Hebrew University from Dr. Pesach Schindler and Shmuel Rosenberg. And his notes are in here. He says that these physical things could be intellectual achievements. It could be like mechanical observance. He says that is to say just praying because you have to, feeling like you're checking off those check marks. It could be hubris. It could be economic achievements. These are things that we collect at these gates that we want to turn around and we think, oh, look at all these great things I have. Look at all these things I've collected, they distract us. And then ultimately, the goal of this is the idea of Dveikut, where if you manage to attach yourself to God, then you see reality for what it is, and you're connected to something true and connected to something eternal. Corey, I see that you said, great story of dedication and devotion. Totally. Enjoy the suffering for its teaching. Interesting. And, the Maggid of Mezrich, he's one of the few who actually thinks that suffering and asceticism is key. Asceticism isn't actually like part of the Hasidic milieu. The idea of like needing to suffer, actually finding joy in God is a major cornerstone of Hasidic Judaism, and connecting to God through love and joy as equally as you do through reverence, or even having that love and joy being the conduit to reverence. But yes, I think we do learn through every part of life, the good things and the bad things. We say God is God creates light, God creates darkness, God creates good, God creates bad. It's all part of this great big edifice, the towers and the ramparts, so to speak. Okay, everybody, we've talked, just to review what we learned tonight. We started with a comment from the Kedushat Levi about the role of the Tzadik lishbor l'kol haaretz, to break one's connection to physical things. We also looked at two other responsibilities of the Tzadik, to be that conduit to teach reverence and love, through which one can love God, and then to have that kind of mystical responsibility of being the one who best takes the somethingness of this world and then connects it back to the eternal nothingness of God. And then we shared a great story about the importance of not being connected to those physical things. And then Corey, you said, if God is the system and the system rides us too hard, are we still grateful to God? I think that maybe the question is, can we still be grateful even when things are really tough? And I think, to answer that question, I'll say that, in our daily Amidah, there is a lengthy prayer of gratitude. And we don't omit that prayer if things aren't going our way. We say, Modim anachnu lach, we stand grateful before you, no matter if it's a good day, no matter if it's a hard day. I think we're allowed, by the way, to protest against God. I think that's part of our right as human beings. We see Abraham, first of all, protesting against God when God said he's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And then we see it even more acutely with Moses. When God says, let me just kill all the Israelites, after the golden calf, Moses says, no, you're not. I will not let you do that. We're allowed to protest against God. Can blame for suffering. They say, cannot love himself. If God cannot even love himself, how can God love us? So this is the thing. So Corey, if because we are part of God, if we love God, then it's also like God loving himself. Yeah, because we're part of God. It's the whole idea of our responsibility here is to connect almost like God back to God's self. To take. Well, I'll stop there. These are good questions. Ir Karmi, I love the Baal Shem Tov stories too. Corey, let's yeah. These are great questions, Corey. I hope you continue to come to these classes and ask them. That's a tough one. I think we'll end here. Corey, if you want to continue the conversation, I'll invite you to send me an email. I'll put my email in the chat, so anybody's welcome to reach out and talk about what we've learned about tonight. feel free to reach out, and I'll wish you all a Shavua Tov. Looking forward to more learning together next week. Okay, goodbye, Corey. Goodbye, your Carmi. Goodbye, Chris, Nathan, Elaine, Steve, and everybody who didn't join us in the chat. Shavua Tov. See you on Tuesday when I lead Morning Minyan, and then especially next Saturday night for Hasidut. Okay, bye, everybody.